Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our talk today called Exploring Graduate Students' Ambitions Using GradSERU. Today, we'll be discussing lessons learned from conducting 3 studies with GradSERU data. First of all, we'll do a little bit of an introduction. All of our team has connections to the University of Iowa. My name is Nicholas Stroup, and I am a PhD candidate in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program. The other presenting members today are Dr. Cassie Barnhardt, Associate Professor of Higher Education here at Iowa, and Dr. SuYeong Shin, who is currently a postdoctoral researcher at UC Irvine. Shinji Katsumoto also contributed greatly to this work, and he is also a PhD candidate in Higher Education and Student Affairs. Our team also includes about a dozen researchers, graduate students, postdocs, and faculty from the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at Iowa, all of whom have an interest in the graduate student experience. Our backgrounds are in institutional research, graduate program management, and we represent a wide array of interests in faculty careers and staff careers, which informs how we approach our use of GradSERU data. And we like this photo of Iowa that we're showing here because it comprises so much of how we see today's research university. You have the old campus hub with the core liberal arts classes and the academic administration buildings, but also the University of Iowa hospital centers in the distance that includes many of our professional students. And you have the University of Iowa and Iowa City campus community where there's a blurred line. And this plays an integral role in the lived experiences of our students. We appreciate using SERU data and GradSERU data to understand the student experience because it accounts for all of these various contexts and how they blend together. Our goal with using SERU and GradSERU also generally is to conduct research that provides actionable data for academic stakeholders and that advances theory. So to do this today, we want to present lessons we've learned from 3 studies that were connected through team-based research. All 3 consider doctoral students. All 3 consider graduate socialization as a central theoretical framework. And all 3 are offering novel considerations of the graduate student experience because of how they capture graduate students' future ambitions. We will not go into each of them in great detail, but to just give you an overview of the kind of work that we did, I'll give some brief discussion. The first study addressed doctoral students with caregiving responsibilities for children and their motivations and perceptions about obtaining a faculty career upon graduation. The second study addressed international doctoral students' self-perceived capacities for civic engagement through their scholarship and perceived preparation to work internationally. The third study addressed international students' future academic role preferences, so the desire to be faculty at certain types of institutions and what barriers during graduate school might diminish that interest in faculty careers. So you can pause the video if you want to look at any of the details here, and we will talk about specific variables later, but we want to just kind of get you to the big takeaway, which is that our use of GradSERU data is really grounded in the belief that the data set of this nature can shift conversations about graduate student success away from conventional analyses, those analyses of just time to degree or the completion of a particular credential or job placement upon graduation. All of those studies are important, of course. They're all driven by the institution's desire to mold students in a particular way, though, which can often be limiting or harmful for students who have been historically marginalized on campus. So instead, we offer 3 studies with outcome variables that focus explicitly on what students want. These outcomes related to ambition, motivation, and perceived capacities are student-centered outcomes that are really relevant to the field of higher education right now. So I will pass it to my colleague SuYeong to talk a little bit more about our approaches.
Thanks, Nick. Using multi-institutional data set, we specifically focus on population pursuing terminal degrees here. We approach all of our studies by considering these 3 contributions. First, how can we implement outcome measures using GradSERU data to better help us understand student experiences, especially when we must rely on self-reported data? Second, how can we use the GradSERU data to examine specific student populations? What current group exists who are typically flattened in research, whose studies could be better be told with disaggregations? And third, how can we use these novel outcome variables with these disaggregation data? We needed to also examine the array of student-relevant campus environment factors. For example, how does the perceived climate for women also influence doctoral caregivers interested in academic jobs? Next page. And here we don't intend to discuss all of this today, but we are happy to let you pause the video and ask us questions in the Q&A session. Our goal was to find outcomes that are relevant to the field at large. What is happening for the professorate in the coming years? How is the doctoral education contributing to the global competency that most universities discuss in their missions? And how are students becoming prepared for work on matters related to civic life? In this table, here are the outcomes we care about because of our desire for student-centeredness. Arriving at these are also a bit of interesting journey. For example, in the third item, we initially wanted to model the desire for research versus the desire for teaching, and so wanted to multinomial register regression analysis, but ended up collapsing these categories because the categories were not distinct. So the outcome ended up being the binary. And this made us realize that the equation was not about increasing interest, but more about the sustaining it. So, and this aligned with some of the theoretical literature, like the data of Veliz, that talks about the barrier to doctoral socialization for international students. And next, And all of the studies were also focused on particular population within graduate education that often received less scholarly attention. We consider specific population because they are influenced by unique contexts and understudies. For example, there is not much research on doctoral caregivers. But as we focus on this group, we consider so many different variables to understand the context of caregiving in graduate school. We examine specific population and disaggregate, but also are guided by complex social factors. This led us to further disaggregate data by caregivers' gender, the age of children, whether they attend the full-time or part-time, or to capture different contexts. This allowed us to understand the lived experience, even though it's quantitative data. There are, of course, challenges with doing this. Compromises frequently had to be made. We particularly consider at length issues of global region versus country and the limitation of IPAS reporting. In working with this data, we acknowledge we were losing out on complexity of race and nationality on students' experiences. The existing research tells us quite a bit of doctoral recruitment is contingent on particular nation-state mobility flow to the US institution. So different understandings of this phenomena can only be grasped at the campus level. I will pass it over to Cassie.
Thanks, SuYeong. So in addition to wanting to center graduate students' experiences on the outcomes, we also really wanted to develop measures that consider the important context of graduate study to characterize factors that contribute to their experiences. So in this section, I want to offer you some insight to how we selected our measures and some of the challenges we confronted in operationalizing those. So first of all, one of the issues that we observed, issue might be strong of a word, but the time or exposure to the treatment, graduate student experiences being the treatment, like being a graduate student is the treatment. Consistently, we observed that the longer a student is in school, it will shape the outcome in different ways. And what we were hoping to find was something that operationalized time in program at the either semester hours or credit hours or in the number of cumulative semesters they enrolled and that kind of thing. And what we ended up needing to do to sort of get at that measure generally as a proxy for that was whether a student was at the dissertation stage as a dummy. They either were or they weren't, and the year that they started. So going forward, as you think about your roles as institutional researchers, this is one of those things, well, we were using a multi-institutional study. You could then, in fact, on your own campus, look at the GradSERU data and layer on some of those more precise registrar data about time to degree and so forth and measure it in those operational ways that I just suggested, which also relates to financial measures in a way. For example, financial The financial conditions for a graduate student often change at research universities before and after a doctoral candidacy, for example. The cost is in fact different once they reach candidacy. And within the survey itself, there wasn't a ton of detail. I understand why, because this has to be multi-institutional, but we looked at, we included measures that focused on reporting concerns about the cost of university attendance, as well as whether they had finances were perceived as a barrier. And what we're thinking is that you could add on, again, institutional level detail about the type of funding, the nature of the funding, and how much that would help you analyze some of these outcomes more precisely. When we looked at discipline, there's been a lot written about academic disciplines and the unique character of graduate education within disciplines. We were able to cluster by general buckets of disciplines, and we would encourage, especially as we looked at like advising dynamics in some of our studies, to really break that down by department, so departments have an opportunity to do some sense making around the relationship between advising experiences and departmental participation up from students' perspectives. And lastly, we had some climate measures that I think are hold promise for future cooperation and measurement as this GradSERU data evolve. We've created a sense of belonging measure that had an alpha value of 0.81 that we hope others might tap into and use as well. The measures we included were friends in a program, belonging in a program, and whether they were proud to be a student in the program, that engagement scale, combining those. And then we also included, Nick, if you want to advance to the next slide. We looked at barriers that international students experience with respect specifically to language, culture, and identity. And initially, these barriers were measured based on the type of persons that they were interacting with, whether it be a faculty, peers, or staff. And we thought that initially these were going to factor by the nature of the role of the person they were interacting with. And what ended up happening is we observed that it was actually the substance of the barrier, whether it was language, culture, or identity. And these factors were really strong with alpha values between 0.8 and 0.9. So I'd encourage you to pause this slide, maybe tinker with these in your own studies, and let's see if these hold true in subsequent administrations of GradSERU. So lastly, to wrap up, really what we want to offer is what we're finding across our 3 studies is that we would cluster for school level effects, university level effects, and we didn't necessarily see lots of institution level effects. Instead, we're finding our outcomes as being individual level effects. And so I'd encourage you to adopt some of these approaches and drill down to subunits or within a graduate college in a university to look at things like, tinkering with financing, or approach to training for teaching, or approach to research to try to refine some of these, to refine practice using data. So we thank you for your time, and we encourage your questions. If you'd like to contact us for more information, our contact information is listed there, and we appreciate the invitation to present to you today. Thank you.